Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Open Room. I'm super excited to be live with a gentleman who I have been waiting for. Manley, it's been a while. It must be at least 4 months that I've been waiting to get in your diary and have this conversation. So everyone meet Manley. This is Manley Hopkinson. He is a specialist in compassion, which just makes my work in empathy feel even more exciting. And I came across him through some mutual colleagues and have been just so excited to have this conversation. So before we kick off and introduce who Manley is and what he's doing, just to give you a background, if this is your first time to Open Room is quite literally an open room. So we're going to have a really open, candid conversation about empathy, about compassion, the workplace and healthcare, which is Manley's real focus for today. And I really encourage you to take part. So please do comment, please do add your questions. We will pop them up and we will definitely come to them. But with no further ado, Manley, tell us who you are and why you fell in love with working in compassion.
Crumbs, yeah. Well, what I won't do, maybe, is give you a full backdrop of all the work I've done, because if I do that, you just work out I'm not very good at keeping a job. But background was military, Navy, but then as a professional sailor, and as a professional sailor, skippering on boats all over the world. I did that for about 10 years. And that culminated in actually me skippering an amazing race around the world called the BC Global Challenge. And I was very fortunate about that particular race. And there's my yacht's right behind me over this shoulder. Is that it was known as the world's toughest yacht race. So go round the world the wrong way, 32,000 miles in 9 months. So quite a journey in its own right. The boats were absolutely identical. And then the key thing here is that the crew amateur. So 8 of my crew had never sailed before in their life, and they're undertaking what is the world's toughest yacht race. So this is where attitude over ability is an extraordinary journey. And so and I guess that makes it really interesting, very human, because if it was just a bunch of professionals doing their job, then the only question is, did you win or were you first loser? But because it's normal folk from all over the world, my youngest in my boat was 21, the eldest was 62. And they're all there for different reasons in life, to change, to escape, to grow, to learn, whatever it may be. And that was a life changer in many respects for me and for my crew. And then also what made it very a perfect storm in a positive way was that it was televised. So I've got some beautiful high quality videos of all the stuff that went on. And also Harvard and Henley Business School commissioned a study on the leadership ability of the skippers. So I'm actually part of a subject matter on the book on leadership. So you've got this incredible journey, amazing stories. You got the videos and pictures to go with it. And then you have an analysis of the leadership and the performance. So that's really what moved me into the space I'm in now.
My gosh, I'm just going to tell you that had you invited me, I definitely would have said no. Because I can't think of anything worse than being at sea for like 9 months as an amateur. Isn't that quite scary?
It's beautiful, but scary is scary. Many things in life are scary. As I say, my crew were there for many, many different reasons. It's a journey. You're not 9 months non-stop. I mean, you're a few weeks and you're into Boston for a week, and then 5 weeks and you're in Buenos Aires. And so you get to meet some go to amazing places in the world, and Wellington in New Zealand, and Sydney, and then Cape Town, La Rochelle in France, and back home again. So it's an incredible journey. But what you find is that every single person grew in their own special way. Some of them were young and fit and sailors, and others weren't. But that didn't matter. And I always believe that the whole principle of any team is that you've got to recognize individual journeys and allow and feed people's individual journey. But then all you need to do is align their journeys with a few sort of moments that you are together, recognizing that their journals will separate and go their own way afterwards too. But maybe you'd be great on a boat because you've got that positivity and shed loads of empathy to tap into the needs of others too, which is an important concept.
Well, anyone who's listening, add a comment and tell us, yes, I'd come, or no, I'm staying on dry land with Mimi. But Manley, tell me, how did that lead to compassion, right? So of those learnings, of those takeaways from Henley, from Harvard, what was the shift from that experience to, I really want to specialize in compassion?
It came over a period of time and through working in a number of ways with business and community leaders all over the world. So one of the things you don't realize at the time, but when I was a young lad and I was in the Navy, I was an officer in the British Royal Navy. What you don't realize is it's a real privilege, because leadership is on the agenda from day one. So at 18 and 19 years old, you're being taught the concepts of leadership and exposed in leadership and giving brutal feedback on leadership and expected to do so. But at the time, you don't realize how valuable that is, because the essence there, the whole principle there, and we may have an image of military leadership as shouting and barking, but that actually couldn't be further from the truth. Because the first ship I had, I was a young sub-lieutenant, so a single thin stripe on my shoulder, and I was responsible for 178 sailors. Some of them have been in the Navy longer than I've been alive. So my job wasn't to tell them what to do. My job was to inspire them to be the best they possibly can be, which is a deeply compassionate concept, as you understand. And then you realize very early on in life that rather than being at the top of the pyramid, you're at the bottom of the pyramid, and your responsibility is to enable everybody to be the best they can be, and then make sure that their energy is aligned to the commander's intent, if you like. And so at the back end of my sailing, I then became a keynote speaker, and I still am. I speak all over the world, and it's obviously developed over the years as you pull out all the lessons. I like doing other silly things as well. I did do a little race to the North Pole. Skiing.
Just a little one.
Little sailing race. Well, as you do. But what I found was that when I was speaking to business leaders and organizational leaders, so not just in the commercial world, but in the public sector too, and in education and in healthcare, I found that they were all talking and wanting the same thing, that they're either trying to improve performance or they're trying to change direction. So either trying to transform the business or improve it, one or the other. And then you think, okay, so it's the same thing as a change, it's a transformation. And then you analyze this, and 75% of organizational changes fail. And you go, why is that? And then it comes down to the principle of commitment. So if you're committed to a particular journey, it's deep within you at an emotional level, and you'll always push yourself harder, because if you're committed, you're resilient, you're engaged, you have ownership and accountability, you're feeling good about yourself, you're in a psychologically safe space, and you're happy, and performance comes. But if you're compliant to something, it's just hard work. And then what I realized was that the secret to any transformation or to performance is actually, how do we gain commitment? And that's what led me into the work on compassion. When I was reading the work of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and who I'd argue is a pretty sound source on the principles of compassion. I can't think of anyone more earthly who actually knows more. You then realize that actually commitment is emotional. It comes from within. It's around fulfillment of self-worth. And then you look at the principles of compassion, and he describes it saying, if empathy is to deeply understand, compassion therefore is to work with that knowledge of positive intent, then that's the secret to gaining commitment. So that's how the compassion bit first came out, and a hugely practical concept, but also research on commitment, but then further research into the writings around compassion and commitment, and that led me into the work of the Dalai Lama. And that's really where it started, and then you just apply it from there, if you know what I mean.
I'm yes to all of it, right? I just think that's a phenomenal way to start this entire conversation, and I love that sentence we've just put up there, which is that compassion sits in positive intent. Yes. People ask me all the time, what's the difference between compassion and empathy? And they ask me in a very specific context. So I'm going to give you that context.
Yep.
And it builds off what you just said there, around change, around emotions, around just carrying people with you on that journey. People always ask me, Mimi, will I burn out from empathy, too much empathy? And I always say no, because the data shows that there is no such thing as empathetic burnout, right? To empathize is to understand, and data has never burnt out anybody. But there is data to show that compassionate exhaustion does exist, right? That there is such a thing as too much compassion. In your mind, is there or is there not such a thing as compassionate burnout? Is there such a thing as too much?
No, and I'll explain why. One of the well-known concepts of self-help is that if people are in a very bad space themselves and are unhappy in their own life, there's so much evidence empirically and scientifically driven that actually through helping other people, you feel better yourself. And actually, we know it's in the smallest thing that we do. Even when we make someone else feel good, that makes us feel good in the premise. And that's the principle of compassion, because it's understanding with positive action. So if you are understanding someone's position, and then you're acting with positive intent, the positive intent and the fact that it's positive intent based on their needs, because it's based on their understanding, actually fills you and fulfills you. And it feeds your energy rather than depressing your energy. So compassion itself actually it is an energy giver to you and to the other person, as opposed to an energy drainer. And so it's a really interesting concept, that one. I mean, the only problem we have, I think, on the word compassion is how people define it. There are many out in the world who say that it's all around trauma and suffering and vulnerability, but I disagree fundamentally. I think it's in the everyday. I think it's in passing the salt. I think it's in opening the door. I think it's in letting traffic come in if someone's coming in on a side road. All it is widening your peripheral vision of the needs of your fellow people around you, dropping your own judgment, and then acting with positive intent. And with that positive intent, the positive intent is the thing that really feeds, because you are then enabling other people to carry on in their journey in an easier way. Yes, it's jolly useful in trauma, but it's not just trauma. It's everything in life. Even if you think about it, at a dinner table, you're a round table at a lovely black tie dinner, and the butter's on the other side of the table. There's a lot of noise. You can't just get up and walk around. But if you're in a compassionate world, then whoever has the butter in front of them may use it themselves, but then they'll think, who else needs it? And it will pass around the table naturally. And that's the principle I mean around compassion. So it's not some crazy, big, scary concept. It's a beautiful, simple thing. It sits in the everyday, in the smallest act or the largest act, and actually feeds both people, which is the key thing around it.
Yeah, which is, by the way, the same with empathy. So I've just finished my third book, and in that book, I created a term with very little thought process, to be honest, but called reverse empathy, to give a name to that exact reality, Manley, which is that when you empathize with someone, you both benefit, right? It is a cyclical benefit for the giver and the receiver. But question for you, is there a difference between compassion and kindness? Because I would question, is passing the salt kind or compassionate, or both, or interchangeable?
It depends. Kindness, you would argue, is a compassionate act, or you could either say compassion is a kind act. I don't think it really matters. I actually think we can get caught in semantics in these things. If the kindness is coming from positive intent and it's coming through understanding, this is the key thing. The understanding is the key. It's the initial empathy is the important aspect, and I'm understanding your position. I'm understanding your needs, and through that understanding, I'm acting positive. If we don't have the understanding, it may not be compassionate. It may not be kind. It may be intended well, but if you don't understand the other person's needs, the danger is we'll get it wrong. I mean, I like rugby and beer. Do you like rugby and beer, Amy?
Who doesn't love rugby and beer? Of course.
Well, actually, be surprised. A lot of people don't like rugby and beer. But the danger is that if I wanted to say, let's say you weren't a fan of rugby, and actually rather a glass of wine than a pint of beer, which may be the case. But the danger is, I think, I think we really go out and have a social together and get to know each other better. Let's go and watch a rugby game and have 10 pints of beer. The danger is we tend to motivate others as we like to be motivated ourselves. We tend to communicate to others as we like to be communicated to. We tend to lead others as we like to be led. And that isn't the principle of compassion. Compassion is understanding their needs and motivating them based on their motivation, and communicating with them based on their communication style, leading them based on their leadership need. I think that's one of the fundamental differences. That a kind act, if done with knowledge, by definition, is a compassionate act. I may think I'm being kind, but actually I may not be. The impact of what I'm trying to do may be based on ignorance, or maybe based just on my need and my thought. So I think the only separation would be it's the understanding part, not necessarily the intent. The intent is good always, and compassion is always good with kind. But is there the understanding behind? Would be a good way to look at, try and distinguish between the two, if you like.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I want to ask another question on behalf of my audience, because
Yeah.
a lot of my audience is in the Middle East and Asia, in fact, most of them, and they
Yep.
ask me these questions, and I always do my best to answer them from my frame of reference, but I would love for them to be able to hear it from you as well. So certainly in South Asia, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the number one question I get asked in this space, Manley, is if I use compassion at work in management, because it tends not to be leaders that ask this question, it tends to be senior managers, will people, and I quote, walk all over me? So how do the audience understand some of the lessons? And we're going to move on to healthcare and how we use this just now. But how do they use compassion in their leadership? Again, this is not the senior leaders that have all the power. This is senior mid. Use compassion and not have it be seen as a weakness.
Yeah, well, compassion itself is actually far from weak. Compassion means doing the right thing. And I know in my life, not just as a speaker and a consultant, but I also sit on the board of companies and I've led teams before. Sometimes the most compassionate thing is saying no. Sometimes the most compassionate thing is actually removing somebody from a situation. The compassionate thing is actually disbanding that team and doing something completely different. So this is where kind can be a very different concept to compassion again. Understanding, then doing the right thing. It's understanding with positive intent. So if you're in a situation which actually you're struggling with and you're not very good at it as a result because you're not happy, you're not struggling, the danger is with kind is that we just try and placate and do stuff. But actually, it's the other way around, that with compassion, it may be best thing to do actually, Mimi, is I'm going to take you away from that. I'm going to take you away from that situation and put it there. I may even have to fire you from the company, whatever it might be. So compassion is a tough thing to do if you know that through your deep understanding, you are then acting with positive intent. And then you know, actually, sometimes what I've found in businesses that frequently the tough decisions and the hard conversations are kicked down the road. People don't want to make them because they feel that it's going to hurt somebody. That's not compassion. That's actually the opposite of compassion, because it just makes the pain even bigger when the hit does come. And it also means you're just passing on the problem to somebody else. So that's the opposite of compassion. So for the people, and I've also worked in South Asia a fair bit, when we do have these conversations, it's just recognizing that it's understanding with positive action. So what is the understanding? If the understanding is actually Manley is the wrong person in the wrong place, he can't do the job, he's absolutely bloody useless, we've got to get rid of him, then the compassion act is getting rid of him, but in a compassionate way, which is don't beat him up. Just say, look, Manley, you're in the wrong place, shipmate. Let me help you go and do something else. And it reminded me some time ago of a work I did with a company. I can't remember the company now, but I do remember the leader was Egyptian. I don't think it's important, but I just remember him being Egyptian. And it was a multinational company. And he had this premise that if anyone ever came to work for him and his team, then he'd recognize that the time would come in their life when they wanted to move on or change roles completely. And his premise was that whenever that time comes, I will actively, positively help you do whatever it is you want to do. So if, for example, I said, well, I've had enough of this talking malarkey, actually, I want to go and become a hairdresser or something, then what this guy did, and only had to do it once, he actively helped that person on their new career, invested time and effort to help them become a concert pianist or a butcher, whatever it was they wanted to be. And all everybody else saw was, wow, that was done beautifully. That person now has left this company into a place where they really want to be. And that's a compassionate act. And it was a case of, you're in the wrong place. You're not the right person. The tough thing to do, which is the compassionate thing to do, is actually make a move now. I'm going to stop you now in this process, and off you go. So I think that's a key fundamental. And when people ask that question, it'd be great if you could answer in that premise that actually compassion is not just doing nothing. It's not necessarily being nice in the moment, because compassion has a long-term view. And this is the key thing around it. It's not an immediate reactive concept. Compassion is very much a long-term view. And the danger when we just react to something is that it's just in the context of the moment, not in the context of the continuum that we sit in. And so there's a key fundamental within it too. And through the work with the Dalai Lama, we define compassionate leadership as to say compassion is to understand and act positively. Compassionate leadership is to secure the best for all. And if I might, secure is really important, because secure is long term, isn't it? You don't just grab it and drop it. If you secure something, you nurture it, you look after it, you foster it, you help it grow, which is really important. And secure the best for all is important. So rather than trying to get the best from somebody and just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, trying to get blood out of a stone, if I secure the best for you, I tap into your self-worth. As a result of that, I get your commitment. And from that commitment, as we discussed earlier, everything else comes. And the all is important too. Because my challenge to leaders is, how many leaders, if you're listening now to this or watching this, know that you get the full 7 or 8 hours sleep every night that you know you should? You do eat all the proper foods that you should do and get your 5 a day? Or do you just snack as you're traveling from one meeting to the next? Do you do the exercise you need to do? Do you spend time on your own hobbies or not? And the answer invariably is no, we don't. And the danger is, in our desire to serve other people, we compromise ourselves. And my premise is, passion has to start at home. It has to start with you. Be compassionate to yourself first. So if I'm in the best place I can possibly be, physically, mentally, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, then I can serve you best. And that's the key element around compassion too. It's not about cooking yourself. It's not about cooking your staff. It's making sure we're doing that right thing. But it's got to start with you as a key fundamental behind it.
Yeah. I resonate with that so much, that self-compassion, or again, when I just take parallels to the messaging that I put out, which is so, so much in the same world. We talk about self-empathy and just this need to be able to understand what you need in order to be able to understand what other people need. And I'm hearing, a very similar reflection from you in there. And I hugely resonate with that, especially the leader you were talking about, the Egyptian man who was trying to help people leave in the best possible way. I have done it many times, that similar action. And I'll say to anyone listening, it makes a huge amount of difference. We can't always stop the redundancies. We can't always stop, the headcount shifts that happen up there in global somewhere. But if we can help those people exit, like you said, Manley, help them upgrade their CV, help them find something else, help them actually assess how well they did in this role, where they might be better. And of course, as leaders, connect them to people, because the older you get, the more people you know, right? Because you've been in business longer. So there's more people to help perhaps some of those younger people find their network. So I do encourage you guys to ask questions. I saw Caroline telling me earlier that she's definitely staying on dry land. I saw Salwa here.
Hello, Caroline, you'd love it. I won't tell the story, Caroline, then of when we came across a hurricane, and rather than run away from it, we attacked it. But that's the whole premise of how we turn a threat into an opportunity. But there you go. Maybe you definitely won't come sailing if you're never going to attack hurricanes.
That's a keynote we need to come to. I want to make sure we have time to talk about healthcare. Caroline is actually, in fact, a doctor. So her and I have been working together in the last couple of months to look at the role of empathy in healthcare, which is why I'm really excited she's here. And I can see there are a couple of other nurses and doctors joining us, Manley. So tell us a little bit about how this journey in compassion and everything you've just defined it as led you, I know, in the UK and beyond, to the NHS and beyond, in terms of compassionate leadership and healthcare, and what that means, I don't know, for the world.
Well, hopefully a great deal. What we find, and I'm based in the UK, and obviously we have our emotional darling, the National Health Service, which was created many years ago and is creaking, to say the least, but it's full of extraordinary people, absolutely extraordinary people, working themselves to a thread and tragically working themselves in positions where they become unwell themselves in their desire to serve others. There's a lot of public pressure on it too. The media, it's quite aggressive here in the UK, as I'm sure it is in many other places in the world. Politicians are afraid to actually do what needs to be done. So they're not acting compassionately. They're acting based on their short-term need rather than a long-term view of understanding with positive action. The demographic of the world is changing, more older people. We also have a different relationship with health. That long time ago, in fact, not that long time ago, maybe a generation beyond us, our parents would have looked after themselves to a greater degree, or certainly our grandparents, and eaten definitely more healthily than we do. And there's an element of responsibility for our own health. But now we tend to say to the state, doctor, fix me, as opposed to fixing ourselves. So there's a lot of pressure on our health systems globally. And this is interesting. So once I started getting involved in this, I realized it's not just the UK. The stats are the same in America, in Germany, in Sweden, and even doing some work in a collection of private hospitals out in the South Asia. And what we're finding is that there are two things. The internal culture is very much driven towards the patient. So everyone keeps talking about being compassionate to the patient and patient care and patient first. Fine and dandy, we've got that. You go into healthcare because you actually care. You only go into healthcare because it's a vocation, a bit like teaching's a vocation too. It's a high element for your self-worth involved in your particular work. And so we get the professionals getting beaten up on saying, go on, look after the patients, look after the patients. They're trying to look after the patients. They're desperate to look after the patients. But there are so many systemic failures and systemic pressures which are confounding their ability to look after the patients. And the danger is with a high vocation is that they then take on the emotional burden and responsibility of their inability to deliver the service they want, which is why in high vocation industries like healthcare and education, for example, the levels of anxiety, stress, mental poor health, and tragically people dying by suicide is much higher than any other industries. And this is one of the reasons why. Secondly, the internal culture is one that was built from a long time ago on absolute deference to the consultant. And it's not at all supportive. It's the opposite of a compassionate culture. And so our premise was, rather than trying to teach them leadership, rather than try and say, hey, look after the patient. So with my work on compassion and the Compassion Leadership Academy, our program does the first bit, which is about creating a bit more around self-authenticity, something you will understand deeply with self-empathy, helping people understand more about themselves at a greater level. So then if you know more about yourself, your emotional state, your motivational state, your purpose element, it helps you lead a life of congruence and also deal with emotional pressures better. So in other words, we help them raise their emotional awareness and emotional intelligence through that process. They're better able to handle the emotional stress. The second thing we do with our work is create pockets of deeply compassionate cultures, which is high support, high communication, high empathy, which is a key element too. And as we do this and bring the two together, you then take away all that tension, all that pressure, and you fundamentally shift and change lives. And we ran a pilot with a big hospital down in Brighton, which finished early on this year. And we also worked with some amazing behavioral scientists in creating a compassion index, which is really powerful. And what we find is that the change has been absolutely fundamental, where doctors are saying, I was going to leave healthcare. I wasn't sure what I was going to do because it's been my life. Now they're saying, I am feeling happy. They're not just saying, I'm okay, or I'm staying. They're saying, I am happy, because they are better able to deal with it themselves. And another one, beautiful on the self-empathy bit, Mimi, this one of the bits of feedback we got was, thanks to this program, I am now seeking help. I was in denial before, but now I know I need it. And so these fundamental shifts, and then creating the localized culture. And then the way we do it, you can never do a top-down transformational change. It just doesn't work for many, many reasons. We won't waste the time on it here now, but for many reasons it doesn't. For any cultural change, you have to engage everybody at every level. And so if we can create local pockets of compassion and repeat that process across a trust, it's a bit like throwing a handful of gravel into a pond. You're only touching 25% of the surface of the pond in reality, but the ripples change everything. And so that's the process we're now working through. So we have the pilot that proves that it works, and it's extraordinary. And now we're just trying to feed it out in the UK, one trust at a time, one hospital at a time. And likewise overseas, we've got interest in the States, interest in Europe, interest also in South Asia. And it's, for me, it's the main focus, Mimi, because the difference we can make will be extraordinary, not just to the healthcare professionals, which is why we call it quite simply compassion for healthcare workers, because it says it is on the tin. There's no doubt what we're trying to do here. If we can help them be happier within themselves and better within themselves, and tragically KPIs on suicide are in there too, we'll save some of their lives, but also by definition, this enables patient first. It enables patient recovery because they're working in a place which is far bigger. But as we all know, hospitals don't just fix poor people. Just to the scale of where they sit in community, they impact the whole community. So many people work in healthcare, and they all go home being more compassionate to themselves. you're then more compassionate with your family, with your friends around you. Compassion spreads like empathy spreads. It's a similar principle, isn't it? That it just flows.
The ripple effect.
Totally right. And then think about the people who come into the hospital, not just the patients, but the suppliers, the people who help and assist. They all go out back into the community with a greater sense of awareness on empathy and compassion within themselves. You can change whole communities by focusing on healthcare as a center for developing compassion.
Well, first of all, congratulations. I know it's not like it's brand new, but just listening to you, I think you said something like this, but you're creating huge impact, you know, and it's just, as you said, the idea, that concept, Manley, of change the healthcare system, change the world, which I'm paraphrasing, but that's what I heard. I just think it's phenomenal, right? I just think it's absolutely phenomenal. And to get, you know, businesses like the NHS, which are sticky and hierarchical and process orientated and political, to lean into the program and say yes, and, you know, to start building that, I think it's phenomenal. And who better to help but to the people that save the lives of all of us. So perhaps we'll come back to that, but I don't want to ignore some of our questions that are coming in from our audience, because I can see them there. So Zalwa here is just adding on something we mentioned earlier around South Asian culture. And I knew, Salwa, this question was in the minds of the audience. So I think Manley touched on it, but she just is asking you a little bit more there around, in South Asia, being compassionate and kind is often seen as a weakness. She says people are being afraid of being walked all over. So my question for you is, how can organizations start that process of cultivating an environment where these qualities are no longer seen as a threat? So perhaps that's how we answer it, because we have touched on it. But what might Salwa do tomorrow to start changing that perception?
Definitely. And Salwa, thanks for your question. And it's not just South Asia, by the way. I would argue that the aggressive corporate West is even worse, because whereas my experience in South Asia is you still have a very strong sense of family and community, that is also disappearing more in the West. So it's a global problem, to say the least. I think let's break it down to what it means. It means understanding with positive action. So it means to deeply understand the situation of another person and then to act with positive intent. If you break it down to those two things there, the first thing it means from a leadership perspective is to listen. Listen with an intent to understand. And if you can listen with an intent to understand, that is not weak. And actually, my question to you is, how do you feel when you know that you're being listened to? And I would argue that listening is very strong. It's a superpower that we all have, but we don't use quite as well as we should, because we get distracted and we have our own thoughts get in the way. So we can start by just helping people understand what we mean by listening. Even the concepts of, when we sit down with someone, we get our phone out of our pocket, we put it on the desk in front of us. Well, what have we actually said? We've actually said, this is more important than you. So let's listen with real intent, because that's the most important thing to do. And then once I've listened, if I'm acting with positive intent and it's securing the best for all, then the positive intent is for the wider community as well as the individual. So what is the best for that individual? What is the best for their team? What is the best for the organization? What is the best for you as the leader too? What is best for the community in which you serve? So even if the word compassion is one that people may struggle with, just break it down. Just say, look, I intend to understand. And then from what I understand, I'm then going to act positively. And just use that definition, if you like, because it's within us all to do that. But I think where we go wrong is that we don't tap into listening properly. We make assumptions. We assume people are doing this or the other, or we think we know. I mean, a good leader bursts into a room and doesn't make a noise. A good leader bursts into a room and shut up and listen. But it isn't what we see. We generally see leaders come into a meeting, a conference, and start talking straight away. And my argument is, if you're a compassionate leader, well, then put a question out there, but then shut up and listen, and deeply desire to understand. Because leadership isn't about you, I think, is the most important thing to understand. If you're an empathetic leader and a compassionate leader, then you're instantly turning around to thinking, actually, no, leadership is about the people I'm with. Because that's the truth. And for any leader, no matter where you are, your success is only on the back of the efforts of the people working for you. So if your team aren't performing, or if the individuals within the team aren't performing, well, then neither are you. So when we challenge this, I'd love to challenge compassion being weak and openly do it. So, well, actually, what is compassion? Understanding with positive action. How can that be weak? Because because it's helping you, it's helping me, it's helping the business, it's helping the community. So let's just challenge the language around it, Salwa. But thank you for the question. It's a really, really important one. Thank you.
I think that your point there, Manley, around semantics, and yes, Caroline's added a really valid point there, but the semantics is so critical. And, often, Salwa, in this region, and I know you see my content often, I might not talk about empathy in certain environments. When I'm in my follower base in LinkedIn, I talk about it consistently because you guys know who I am and you're already in the empathy mindset, right? Or at least you've come in because you might be interested. But for example, Salwa, when I step on a stage with, let's say, 1,500, 1,600, whatever, male, predominantly Indian leaders, for example, in Bangalore or somewhere, I look out an audience of men, I probably won't put the word empathy anywhere near the first 10 slides of my keynote. Because exactly to what Manley's saying, the definition of these terms is beneficial for all, is strategic, is high level, is a skill set. But semantics can put people off. So, yeah, I really resonate.
Maybe that's a really good point of compassion in action as well, because you understand your audience, you know what message you want to get across, but because you understand, you're modifying your language, which is the positive thing to do, without judgment. So, because this is the point of compassion, is dropping your own judgment, dropping your own preference. I may like to use the word compassion, but it's not about that. What word can I use which will help them buy into the principle? Pretty good example. I did a lot of work with some senior police officers in the UK, a lot of the police forces in the UK, essentially around developing emotional intelligence. But if I said to a policeman, I'm going to grow your emotional intelligence, the shutters have just come down. So we called it power and influence. Well, that sounds much more exciting, which is the same thing, because they come together in a beautiful way. And so it's choosing your language, I think, is a really key. It's a very important point there. Salwa, thank you. And Mimi, you made that beautifully too, that you understand your audience, and then without judgment, with positive intent, what is the right thing to do? What is the right language to use? What is the right act to make?
Caroline's adding here, creating a culture of compassion and empathy starts from the day that somebody walks into an organization. Adding this to the onboarding process and the annual CBD might benefit all. Any thoughts on that, Manley, from a healthcare point of view?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the problems I think we have in healthcare is that people get into it with this very strong desire to help others, by definition. I'm caring for others, I'm caring for other people's health. The danger we have is that the known culture in healthcare is pretty aggressive and not much fun, to be honest, because it's all out there. There's so many stories come out every day of doctors and nurses and porters and hotel staff all being unhappy and leaving. And so the danger there is that people aren't going to come and join. And we're having a real recruitment problem, not just here in the UK, but I know in Europe too, where people think, I don't want to join healthcare because why would I? It's horrible. So answer Caroline's bit, then yes, it does start the day you come in. But the one we have to do, we still have to create that culture of compassion internally almost first. Because if I've got a strong culture of compassion, I am by definition going to attract compassionate people within it. Because when you look at an organization, if its culture is defined and articulated, then actually you know what it is. It's like you don't join the army and get surprised when you got to go marching around and shouting and stuff, because you know what it's all about. And it's the same with healthcare. So you're quite right. It isn't something just waits for senior leaders. We have to inculcate it throughout the whole of the organization, and definitely part of the recruitment, part of the onboarding, part of the annual review. It should be part of everything we do. In any decision we make, is that a compassionate decision? Was that decision based on understanding, and was it made with positive intent? Once we start analyzing, bringing compassion down to that level of granularity and daily use, then it just becomes the norm. It becomes that culture. But you're quite right. We can't just bring people in and assume they'll suddenly be compassionate. We can help them on that journey too. But also we can extend further before they've even joined in our recruitment process and say, hey, we're strong on compassion. How does that feel to you?
I always believe, Manley, that what you measure manifests. So if there is no measurement for these things, very difficult to sustain them. You can do a compassionate workshop or a compassionate series of workshops, but if there's no way for those leaders, probably HR, to measure those, and you talked earlier about these small acts, passing the salt, saying good morning, whatever those are in the workplace.
Yeah.
If we can't measure them, very hard to sustain them would be my sort of belief there.
It is. And we were very conscious of that. And so before we embarked on the pilot program for the Compassion for Healthcare Workers, we engaged some behavioral scientists, a company called Mind Alpha, extraordinary people, headed up by a guy who was head of research for Citibank for 20 years and has got a brain the size of a planet and a PhD in behavioral science and stuff, just to say, does it work? Does compassion actually work? And so what they did this meta global study on linking what are the elements that are compassionate, what are the actions, behaviors, or words that are compassionate, and how do they impact on motivation, on well-being, and on performance. And what they found is an absolute direct correlation, and there are sort of 9 factors, if you like, of compassion, which have a direct empirical correlation to those 3 elements of performance, motivation, and well-being. And so what they did, they created what we call a compassion index, which we now integrate into all our work. And what is lovely is that you can then, as you go through the program, you go through the work, there are various touch points, we actually do the measurement, because you're quite right. We need to measure these things as much as we can. And so we can now see how people's elements of compassion are rising as they go through the program and beyond. Nice. And so that has been the holy grail of the work that we do, to be quite frank, isn't it? How do you measure these things? But absolutely powerful stuff. And it's a really, really good point. So it's like when people have, company values and how they're made, which are great, but company values don't belong to a company or to the wall or to PowerPoint. They should belong in your everyday action. But we need to bring them into the CPD process. Absolutely right. The CPR, and also into our review process. Absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, and we, in my platform, we don't yet have our dream empathy audit or, any of that yet. However, I will say to the people listening that we have now loaded our first empathy audits onto my website, which is www.empathyeverywhere.co. So you can't measure it through a program. We're not quite as sophisticated yet as Manley, but you can now go onto the website and measure your own empathy levels in terms of whether that's through a leadership lens or just a personal lens, because I want to create that space, Manley, for people to be able to see where they are. Caroline's, I'm so happy you're here, because I didn't mention this earlier, Manley, but I met with Caroline in person last week in Dubai, and her and I spent 2 hours discussing all of this. So I'm thrilled she's here today to add her professional opinion as well. She's just saying there that this is a very valid point about creating culture from within and perhaps seeking out the positive stories in healthcare. And as I mentioned, she's a surgeon herself. They do exist, she says, might help counter the negative ones. And this will show that compassionate side of healthcare. And she's just saying thanks.
I believe they exist and outweigh the negative stories, Caroline, by 100 to 1. There is so much extraordinary goodness. But then the tragedy we have is in our media, which just generally only wants to tell the bad stuff. I subscribe to an article called a magazine, which is also online, called Positive News.
Me too.
The world. It's brilliant. It's great, isn't it? But why not? And when most people start the day, they put on the television with this misery and negative, and no wonder we feel low. And even with the weather forecasters here in the UK, as soon as it rains, they say it's a grey day. I've been to parts of the world where it hasn't rained for 7 years. They're dying for rain. Rain is liquid sunshine, for goodness sake. But you're quite right. We have to pull out those positive stories and let them be heard too, because there are, as I say, far, far more positive ones than negative ones. But the danger is that the negative ones get the noise, become what people see and hear. But then you get politicians, I think with the right intent, saying things like the NHS is broken. Why would you say that? If I'm
doesn't help with does it?
I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm a porter, I work in the canteen, and all I'm hearing is, you say we're broken? What about those 200,000 people we fixed just that last year? What about those people who came in hobbling, then went out skipping with hip operations? What about all those sort of things that happened? Yeah, we need to change the whole language on so many things in life, which is where empathy and compassion come in spades, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just wish, I'm not in the UK, but I do feel that probably the American and the British media are possibly the worst culprits for the sort of for the negative, like that kind of tabloid storytelling, which just feels so overwhelming. And of course, the size of them, their reach is so huge that it is hard to avoid. And when you said that moment there about we're broken, and you mentioned the porter or the lady working in the cafeteria, I kind of want to cry, Manley. It just feels
You do.
so awful, that
Yeah.
that they're doing their best, even if they're serving the pasta, they're there. And I've been in those hospitals, as I'm sure many of you have, at times in our lives, caring for someone you love. There is only hospital pasta to eat. And that lady that serves you, or the curry or the rice, or wherever you are in the world, is part of, the recovery of that process, because it's a moment when you feed your body, you meet someone that's, not in intensive care or wherever they are. And I just feel that is, like you said, we just have to think about the language and that messaging from a mass compassion point of view, because what are we doing to the energy and the mental health of our nations, of our healthcare systems, if we consistently give them messaging that pushes them down rather than lifts them up?
And that's in many respects, maybe, which leads into your work on the elements on empathy. So empathetic communication is am I deeply understanding what will happen if I say what I'm about to say? It's that lovely principle of 3 gates, isn't it? Which I'm sure you're aware of, that before you say anything, it has to pass through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? And if imagine if our media and our politicians filtered through those 3 gates, what a different world we'd have, wouldn't we?
I think people are in such a rush, Manny. So this is sort of slightly left of where the conversation is, but I think people are in such a rush to succeed right now that they don't have time to think about anything. And, often people say to me, Mimi, how have you done this empathy thing that you're doing, right? How did you get here? And the answer I always give them is only one word. And I say, slowly. Slowly is how I've done. Right? Because if you try and rush these things, you are unable to use your empathy, to understand the impact of your work, to use any compassion for that positive intent and that positive outcome, because you're rushing, right? Not only does the brain not work very well under stress, but time is not in your favor either. So I think, a key message I'm finding resonating with my audiences, and perhaps with yours as well, is this concept of slowing down to speed up. Because we're just running too fast, Manley. Do you agree?
Totally. I'm actually influenced. My work has been influenced fairly heavily by the Dalai Lama and the work on compassion and elements of Buddhism too. I'm not a Buddhist or anyist necessarily, but there's so much in the teachings around slowing down and being still, being quiet, and also what is success. I feel that we've been sold a lie on what success might be. Even if you look at sort of something as simple and well known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic needs at the top is actualization. It's not a large house or a smart car on top, it's you. It's you as a human being sitting on top of that. So success surely is an internal thing, isn't it? As opposed to an external thing on badges and symbols.
I think the world is far from recognizing that, however we got here. But I did listen to Stephen Bartlett this morning on Diary of a CEO, and in one of his conversations, recent ones he was having, he was saying one of his challenges is he cannot sit still. He cannot do nothing ever. This is Stephen himself, so I'm not saying anything he didn't say. He is so focused on growth, his podcast, his businesses, his entrepreneurial journey, that he has totally become incapable of stopping, and that he doesn't have that moment to reflect or slow down or consider anything, because just the way he's grown, the way his business is, the way I guess business society is, it's about the next and the next and the next. And he said, I'm very aware, to the person who's interviewing, that the next is not going to necessarily make me any happier or better. So he said, I do wonder why I keep doing the next thing, but I don't know how to stop it. It's what it is,
Yeah.
So
it is
anyway,
that's where, as we all agree, empathy and compassion has to start with you first, isn't it? Self-empathy, self-compassion. Be kind to yourself, understand yourself, deeply understand yourself. That is, which is a key premise too. Not to think. One of the problems we have is that as a human being, we have ourself, if you like, which is really my core character. The core Manley was sealed around 8 years old. My ego was set there, and even how I packed for holiday was sort of hardwired in my psyche just at the end of my childhood. Then around that period too also becomes a moment of realization in a child where they realize they're being judged. And so rather than just being true to what they want to do and doing it for their own reasons, they're thinking, what's expected of me? What does society expect? What does mummy and dad expect? What does my friends expect? What does social media expect? and we get dragged further and further away from who we are by the dominant cultures we're within. Now, that's fine to a degree, because we're social animals, as you know with your work very well indeed. A lot of your work is around bringing people together, which is vital, absolutely vital. Is that the social animal also creates a compromise, because I can't just be the 8-year-old Manley, because I've got responsibilities and I've got to engage in the world. As much as I may want to be the 8-year-old Manley, because I think he had a laugh. I think this one has a laugh too, by the way. But what I can do is what the term I create is this concept of a conscious compromise. So be deeply aware of who you really are at a core base human level, your core sense of being, your 8-year-old Mimi. Who is that 8-year-old Mimi? And then see the Mimi that is here today and think, well, the gap, that gap's okay. That's a small enough gap that actually I'm happy in who I am. I can fulfill self-worth, and that puts me psychologically in the best place. And there's a gap big enough that I can still communicate and get on with the rest of the world. I think that's one of the most important premises. It's actually the foundation of all the work I do with all communities when I talk around compassion, is raising the self-awareness, being aware of how we're operating now, make sure that there's a conscious compromise. And through that, that's a center of well-being. And if I'm in a good place and you're in a good place, then actually collectively we're brilliant.
Well, there we go. Collectively, we're brilliant. So I want to begin to close. I'm conscious of the time, but I do just want to recognize Magda down there with her.
Yeah, I feel like
this is
comment.
Now I love it. She's put it on a coffee coaster, which she gave me last week as well, and it's on my desk that says nice. Life is not a race and you are not too late. Magda, thank you. She told me this morning as well. She's brilliant. And Magda, by the way, was the person that sent me that podcast from Stephen Bartlett. So you have had an impact today, Magda. Thank you for coming. Manley, it's been an absolute pleasure. As I said at the beginning, I've been waiting 4 months for this conversation, but I feel like it was bigger than I thought. I knew that we could talk for hours, but I felt that so much of what you said today was also just a reassurance of the work, that I'm doing alone most of the time out here in the world. And it can be quite a lonely journey as I don't know, founder, thought leader, whatever it is that we're doing, because you create, you broadcast, you create and you broadcast. And when I've sat with you today, Manley, you have given me a real sense of kind of depth of the importance of this work and what it means in healthcare and, of course, in leadership and beyond. So I could carry on all night, but I won't. I'm going to be compassionate towards your time. Thank you for your time, and thank the audience as well, because you guys have been absolutely brilliant here with us today. And hopefully, Manley will get a chance to do something else together really soon.
That would be a real pleasure, Mimi. It really would. And I do follow your work closely. And I see you out there, as you say, making a difference and being deeply empathetic and deeply compassionate, always acting with positive intent. So it's a great thing, Mimi, and carry on.
Thank you. Well, here's to positive intent and to open rooms everywhere for these conversations to carry on. Guys, thank you for coming. We will be back next week with another episode. And until then, be compassionate, be kind, be empathetic, and most of all, be you. So thank you very much, Manley. See you soon.
See you. Bye.